There we go. I know that there's, other, products that exist out there, but like I said, I guess it just depends on what you want to pay for in terms of something that's web-based, because everything I've seen costs money. I would imagine that the practice questions that come with Launchpad would also be a pretty good, review, or at least for just kind of to fill out what kids still need help with. Ryan, do you have any suggestions for?
Yeah, I'm going to sound like a broken record. I'm going to kind of take liberty with web-based and say that collegeboard.org, where you can get the AP, the old, download your AP tests as a somebody with an audit, approved audit. You have access to 2 old tests, and everybody on the planet has access to every free response question that's ever been developed.
Exactly.
And those are as intimidating as those can be for relatively new teachers and new students. And I remember I used to look at them this time of the year and say, oh my gosh, what a disservice I've done to my kids. But they always did well, and you have to trust that you have to trust your kids to know that they can handle those questions. And if your students haven't looked at a free response question yet, then they need to see those before May the 1st, because they look intimidating, and you'll see that that's a question coming up later. They look intimidating, but they're not impossible once you break them down and look to see what the content strands are. So that would be my advice. And
to kind of go along with that, look at the newer questions, the ones that are post-redesign, because while the questions that are pre-redesigned can be helpful, they're not in the format of the redesigned exam. And so what you'll want to make sure that your students are prepared for is, number one, lots of reading, because there is a lot of reading on these, especially on the long free response questions. The first one that comes to mind for me is the 2015 operational exam, the mouse on the wheel, and the circadian rhythm question. And kids had to read 2.5 pages of prompt before they actually got to the question. And so, make sure that they get exposure to that continuously, not just on test days, but continuously. Because the more they see it, the more comfortable they'll get with it, the less anxiety they'll have on test days.
And to that end, even though that question came first in the book, they do not have to answer that question first. That 10-point question has the same weight as 3 shorter questions, and they should probably answer the shorter questions first, and then move on to the longer form FRQs at the end of the test when they've made sure that they've picked up every point that they can based on the content that they know.
Well, and tell them to budget their time accordingly. I mean, I tell my students, you need to budget at least 20 minutes for the long free responses and about 6 minutes for each of the short free responses. Because even though now they have an option to read during that first 10 minutes, they don't have to use it as a reading period. Now they can just write. And what I tell my kids is, I still teach them to do the reading. Read through all the questions, kind of pick and choose which ones you think you can answer first and go for that. And then, budget your time according to the guidelines I've given you. That way you have at least 4 minutes to go back, look, make sure you've answered all the questions, make sure you've at least attempted to answer all the questions. Because I tell my kids, look, the reader can't give you any credit for nothing. But if you at least attempt something, there might be points there, especially if you have to rush through the last couple of questions of the exam.
If it's directed at the prompt itself, and I think I think that goes without saying. To that end, it's kind of interesting. This is splitting hairs, but if you get a question, kids should look at every question before they start to write. That's essential. And what I always tell my kids is that if they see something that looks like it's just a softball right down the plate, maybe it's a cladogram, maybe it's looking at an amino acid sequence and recognizing a mutation and looking for changes in amino acid sequences. Every kid's probably going to have seen that, and the goal is to beat the mean, not to be perfect, but to beat the mean on any question. Therefore, if they know it, it's likely that many students all over the world know it, and they need to invest time in making sure that they beat the mean. And then the converse is also true. If they get a question like looking at circadian rhythms in mice running in wheels, it's quite likely that that question came out of left field. It's quite likely that question is going to be difficult for everybody. Again, you don't have to get a 5 out of 10. You're looking to get a 3 or a 4 out of 10 to beat a mean on that question, which is around a 2 or a 2.5.
Right. Well, and to that end, really questions like that present the students with data and graphs that they have to interpret, because that was part of the question, was having to look at the data and then use that data to support the claim that the scientists were, making about circadian rhythm. Give your kids plenty of opportunities to do that in class, and not just with free response questions, with labs. Make sure they're getting that practice in, writing lab reports and stuff. I mean, at my school, we've gone to, we've totally done away with asking lab questions, and we've moved to a claim, evidence, and reasoning framework for every lab that we do. That way students get that practice at looking at the data that they've collected in lab, that messy, ugly data, and, stating a claim about that data and then backing it up with evidence and reasoning. Because those are the types of things they're going to see, not just in the free response portion of the exam, but also on the multiple choice portion of the exam, because they can be presented with a set of data and then say, okay, which of the following statements supports the claim that blah, And so if they don't have practice at doing it themselves, they're going to struggle when they are asked to do it, in either of those two testing situations, free response or multiple choice.
I agree.
Well, now that we've probably answered all of the questions here. I'm kidding. I'm kidding. That was really good. That was really good advice. I have to say, I mean, I've sat on, several of these sessions, and you guys talking about telling your kids to beat the mean. Like that's, I hadn't heard that one before.
Yep. Yeah, I always tell my students, aim high. Aim high.
I used to consult in Alabama, and I had top half of the state. I had about 80 teachers that served, and one Leslie Mason, who's up in Harvest, Alabama, she's grown a program to about 250 kids, almost the size as Lee's, and her kids knew me as Dr. Beat the Mean. I mean, because that's how you tell them, beat the mean, beat the mean.
Right, per question. Like I get beat the mean the test, but I hadn't broken it down per question, and that's really clever. All right.
Well, and what students are always surprised to find out is that the mean is actually really low. My kids freak out when they get like a 7 out of 10, and I'm like, no, kids, you don't understand. That's twice the mean. And they're like, what? I go, yeah, that's twice the mean. I said, so if you're aiming for a 7, that's fabulous if you can get it. You're already beating the mean if you can do that.
Perfect. We received some questions about the using principles of life. So so we went ahead and included those, obviously.
Okay.
It's not our shameless plug. We really did receive these questions. I believe that's probably why the name was included, so we didn't, say we're throwing this in there. So just to answer this question, tips for using the teacher's edition for those who are wanting to adopt it.
Okay,
I think
I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, you go ahead. Ladies first.
Okay, well, what I was going to say was that, I'll give a disclaimer. I am not using the teacher's edition because, unfortunately, in the state of Texas, we can only adopt books every 10 years. And so I do use the first edition of Principles of Life, but I wish I could use the second edition because the second edition has the wraparound, which really is helpful because it puts all of those extra resources in one place. And so for somebody who's beginning to teach this course, especially if if their school has adopted this book for them, or even somebody who's looking for, a consolidation of resources all in one place, the really nice thing is that the wraparound provides all of that it's like a one-stop shop. And so, for me, if I were going to get to use the second edition of the teacher's book, that's where I would look. It's like, okay, well, how can I supplement the things that I already do with things that align with this textbook, or, find additional, resources for my kids to help them with interpreting data, or, learning how to write in science, or something that's a more practical application of this principle that we've learned about. And so I think that, using that wraparound is super, super helpful for anybody, who wants those additional resources.
And I would say just sort of the thing I really loved about the wraparound was that we set it up as broken down by science practices. When we were helping kids analyze figures and look at data, we really highlighted particular learning objectives, and that is incredibly explicit in the wraparound. And so I always think you got to know the students. So if you know where your students struggle, you want to look for those particular learning objectives or those particular science practices in the margins and say, oh, this is what I need to work on. I should focus here. I think even though much of and when you look at the teacher's edition, content that is not directly tested, that's not directly tied to an AP learning objective is redacted. It's there, but it's just got a gray filter on top of it. That's fantastic, but I think we also realize, especially this time of year, that we are still behind or we haven't uncovered as much material as we would have liked to. So you can use the wraparound as a guide to say, oh, I need to, if I'm going to talk about control of gene expression, bang, I need to be looking here, and oh, cool, look, I could use this example of Arabidopsis and looking at resistance to drought, or, ooh, wouldn't it be cool if I, talked about the French flag model and how digits grow in Hox genes. I mean, all that stuff it's laid out quite clearly. If I was an advanced user, if I'd been teaching for quite a while, and I was like, okay, what have you got for me? I think the fact that we added a open source peer-reviewed paper tied to every chapter is just way cool. When Franklin Bell and I were working together on this, he said, this, if we didn't do anything else but just add this paper and these guiding questions to that paper, we'd be doing teachers a great service. And that's, again, like Lee said, not only writing science, but reading science and getting confidence in the ability to break down an abstract and see what it means, to look at some graphs from a peer-reviewed journal and make comments about what they mean. Heck, even just having the links to those, popping them open and throwing the graph up would be a great practice to start or end a day.
Yes. Well, and going along with that, one of the things that I've been emphasizing with teachers lately is, exposing students to different looking types of graphs, things that are not necessarily a bar graph or a pie graph or a scatter plot. They need to see different representations of data, because, one of the things that about that mouse on the wheel question, no students had probably ever seen an actogram before. I know I hadn't ever seen one before when I saw that question, because I was like, what the heck is this? And so I thought, okay, if I don't even know what this is, I know my kids don't even know what this is. And so, the fact that there are those open source papers provided means that the kids are going to get exposure to different ways that data can be represented, which I think is really important, because that's how they're going to see it on an exam. They're not going to see just the run-of-the-mill graphs. They're going to see stuff that is from papers and that comes from papers. So I think it's really important for them to see that.
Yeah, even thinking about energy allocation in the seeds last year, that was a stacked bar graph that looked just a little bit different. And, Lee was in one of my summer institutes last year in Auburn, and we had just built stacked bar graphs in an ecology context, and then they saw it in another ecology context, and they were all over that question. So it was, it's a matter of practice. That's a great point.
For sure.